Family Secrets is one of the two most important books published in the last year or so on the broad subject of deep politics for a number of reasons. And I want to just define briefly what deep politics is, according to the person who coined the phrase, Professor Peter Dale Scott. And I commend you to his work, commend his works to you if you don't know Professor Scott. He wrote that deep politics is defined as all those political practices and arrangements, deliberate or not, which are usually repressed rather than acknowledged. He went on to define a deep political system as one which resorts to decision-making and enforcement procedures outside as well as inside those sanctioned by law and society. This book is important in my estimation for two main reasons. For its revelations, and Russ will go into them in some detail, I'm sure, but also for the manner in which we see a, relatively speaking, mainstream investigative journalist paying attention and publishing on subjects that, for the most part, are demonized by the mainstream media. I hope this connective tissue between two opposing camps, if you will, and have been opposing camps for too long, continues to become enriched by investigation, by thought, by publication. And if this is any indication, if this book is any indication, it will be, I'm sure. This connective tissue, there will be attempts to sever it. Anyone who's read the Los Angeles Times review of this book, for instance, will understand the manner in which the messenger is shot, the message is ignored. For those of us who have labored in the deep political mine shafts all these years, that's nothing new to us. But the voices are still heard, and this is one of the most powerful and eloquent voices addressing these subjects, of which I know. I mentioned the other great book on the subject was James Douglas's JFK and the Unspeakable. This is not a JFK assassination book per se, although as someone who has examined that event for many, many years, I was just knocked out by some of the revelations that Russ presents in the book about that event. And I think that's critically important to understand why. He comes at this from his perspective, with a fresh perspective. He can see the forest and the trees. He can look at what happened in Dallas in such a way that those of us who looked at it for so long maybe can't. Maybe we've become myopic over the years. Maybe our focus is too tight. Well, he came in and during the question and answers, we'll get into this as well, and saw some brand new things. And I cannot stress just how important those revelations are to the study of that deep political event. In any event, I am very, very pleased to be able to introduce to you Russ Baker.
Thanks very much, Charles. I also want to thank Books on the Square and Carol Finger for making this possible, and Robert for filming this, and especially to Erin for getting you all out here. She's done a terrific job of spreading the word about this, and I hope later to talk a little bit about the importance of what ordinary citizens can do to change the equation. And I think her offering, really, I'm only here because of her, and her offering to arrange this, I think is critically important, this kind of volunteerism. Just in terms of what Charles was saying about deep politics and the mainstream media and what they are and are not able or willing to state, just from today's paper alone, New York Times, page 3, it's an article and labeled news analysis, and they always label it news analysis when it gets a little too close to uncomfortable truths, and now is sort of not exactly reporting, it's something else. But in this article, David Sanger, who covers national security, writes, President Obama's decisions this week to retain important elements of the Bush-era system for trying terrorism suspects and to block the release of pictures showing abuse of American-held prisoners abroad are the most graphic examples yet of how he has backtracked in substantial, if often nuanced ways, from the approach to national security that he preached as a candidate, and even from his first days in the Oval Office. And he goes forward to try to sort of analyze what that might be, a series of possible explanations, some of them, I think all of them legitimate to consider, some of them more probably benign in many people's minds than others. Another article that I think is very important, and I'm mentioning these because they relate to what is in Family Secret, is an article, I think it was yesterday, about, well, several articles really. One is about the Carlyle Group, an organization, rather mysterious, giant kind of globe-encompassing financial organization that has managed to rope in people like George H.W. Bush, John Major, a lot of former national leaders from around the world, and they are now implicated somewhat in the corruption involving the getting of business from pension funds. And that's very, very interesting because the article is really all about the connections and the emails that go back and forth and the, how everybody knows each other, and that it's all about relationships. There's another article in the paper yesterday about a guy named Charles Millard, also another person tied in with the Bush family, who ran the Department of the federal government, also involved with the awarding of business related to pensions. And in his emails, you see again him sort of joking with these people from the big financial houses about how the golf average is, and we've timed the request for proposal. It'll be due right before you have to leave for your Alaskan cruise and so forth. And in all of these articles, the New York Times writers really tried. If you sort of read the article carefully, you'll see that needle in the haystack, that one sentence that sort of wants to scream out and to say, this is how things really work, folks. The system is rigged. We'd like to talk more about it, but if we keep doing that, we start seeing like we're, The Nation magazine or something like that. And so they have to sort of kind of bury it in plain sight, and they so often put it in a little bar of comments, kind of pointing you to that. So there are a lot of very, very good people in the more traditional news organizations trying to get the word out about how things really work. And I think that's one of the themes of Family of Secrets, is the enormous gap between the way that we understand our history and the way that it really is. I came to do this book about 5 years ago, just to show that I'm not so far out beyond the pale. I went, as many journalists do, and people in other fields, like you have the Peace Corps and so on. They one field of people that get asked sometimes to go abroad and do good work are journalists, and somebody else I knew had been going to do journalistic training in other places, and she was sort of worn out, and she said to me, "Hey, do you want to go to Serbia?" And I sort of said, "Sure." Right away it sounded interesting to me, and she said, "You'll do some journalistic training, and you really aren't any limitations on you. It's supposed to be the kind of good PR for the United States." I said, "Sure." So I went there and I did that, and I ended up staying in Serbia for a year and a half. But while I was there were some very interesting events, including I don't mention this in the book, but the assassination of the reformist prime minister there, shot by certain people were apprehended. There are suspicions in Serbia that this was arranged at higher levels. Some people believe it had something to do with the security services, who were still tied in back to the dictator Milosevic. And of course, if you read my book, you know how familiar this is. If you read the chapters about Nixon's ouster, Kennedy's removal, and so forth, but things that beset Jimmy Carter when he tried to reform the intelligence establishment. So anyway, while I was there, we had the invasion of Iraq, and I was writing about it for American publications and pointing out how transparent it was as something that was basically accomplished under something of a ruse. And I was sort of surprised that there wasn't more open criticism and discussion in the United States at that point. And people in Serbia, and then as I traveled throughout Europe, began sort of, well, they were saying to me, "What about your country? What has happened to your country? We used to respect your country. We used to love your country and look at it as the shining beacon on the hill, the exemplar of all the values that we aspire to. And your country has just so disappointed us." And I began thinking about this, and when the man in the information booth at a train station in Belgium found out I was American and practically spat in my face, I thought, boy, I really ought to get back to the United States and figure out what is going on here. As a journalist, I felt I had an obligation. And really, the only question I wanted to ask more than anything else was, how did George W. Bush, of everybody you could possibly think of, become the president of the United States? And how did he become the most powerful person in the world, and then unleash this whole series of extraordinary events that we're only now, I think, beginning to kind of come to terms with, and we will be coming to terms with for, I think, decades and maybe generations to come. And so